Thank you, Bonnie. The psalmist says, "Make a joyful noise unto the Lord, all the earth. Worship the Lord with gladness. Come into his presence with singing." We're told the people of Israel sang that hymn most often as they were coming together on a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. Imagine people coming together all to Jerusalem, north, south, east, west, and suddenly as they combine and they're heading to this one place, to the Temple Mount, the temple of God, that's where they are cued by the Levites. Sing the hymn, and they begin to sing together. It's interesting to note that in this hymn, while we can't see it in English, in Hebrew, all of the verbs are plural. In other words, it's a hymn that's to be sung by all the people together. Praises to God as they come into his presence. Come into his presence with singing. Let me set another scene for you as we fast forward to a celestial celebration, one from John the Revelator. And this is even more dramatic. Hear these words from Revelation 4. "After this I looked, and there in heaven a door stood open. And the first voice, which I heard speaking to me like a trumpet, said, 'Come up here, and I will show you what must take place after this.' At once I was in the Spirit, and there in heaven stood a throne with one seated on the throne. And the one seated there looks like jasper and carnelian. And around the throne is a rainbow that looks like an emerald. Around the throne are 24 thrones, and seated on the thrones are 24 elders dressed in white robes, with golden crowns on their heads. Coming from the throne are flashes of lightning, and rumblings and peals of thunder. And in front of the throne burn 7 flaming torches, which are the 7 spirits of God. And in front of each side of the throne are 4 living creatures, full of eyes in front and behind, and the first living creature like a lion, the second living creature like an ox, and the third living creature with a face like a human face, and the fourth living creature like a flying eagle. And the 4 living creatures, each of them with 6 wings, are full of eyes all around and inside. Day and night without ceasing they sing, 'Holy, holy, holy, the Lord God the Almighty, who was and is to come.' And whenever the living creatures give glory and honor and thanks to the one who is seated on the throne, who lives forever and ever, the 24 elders fall before the one who is seated on the throne and worship the one who lives forever and ever. They cast their crowns before the throne, singing, 'You are worthy, our Lord and God, to receive glory and honor and power, for you created all things, and by your will they existed and were created.'" This is the word of the Lord. Do you see the similarities in those 2 scriptures? Like Solomon's temple celebration, this heavenly worship is a never-ending technicolor praise extravaganza. It's quite the scene with characters dressed in white, singing, trumpets, strange creatures, rainbows, lightning, thunder, a sea of glass, and on and on. A rather vivid image, wouldn't you say? It's interesting to note that science has discovered that there is a connection between singing and good mental health. Neurologists have studied that when we sing, our brains tend to give off oxytocin and endorphins. These are hormones that work together in our minds to relax our minds and to relieve us of some of our anxieties. And the good news is you don't even have to be a good singer to enjoy the benefits. All you have to do is make a joyful noise. Just try to sing and you'll enjoy the benefits. When people are struggling with stress and anxiety, oftentimes their minds shut down. And neurologists can take a scan of the brain and see that parts of the brain have shut down as the person can only focus on what is causing them stress. So we have something that tells us scientifically that we can measure that singing is good for you. And I think David knew this at an early age. Many of the Psalms that were attributed to David was when he was a younger man. Could it be that he learned how important music is from the time he spent with in King Saul's court? King Saul was someone who struggled with mental health. We are told that he was disturbed oftentimes. And when he was disturbed, everyone in his court was on pins and needles. They would summon young David to come and play his harp, and somehow that would soothe his soul. That would soothe King Saul's mind. And maybe David understood that this is why he wrote these words, "Come into his presence with singing." It's music that makes a difference in the world. So there's encouragement for us. We can help our mental health just by showing up every Sunday, picking up a hymnal or putting on a choir robe, and singing together. It can make a difference in our lives. And when you think that way and you begin to read the scriptures, you see that it has been there since the very beginning. In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. And the way it says in our Bible, God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. In other words, God speaks everything into existence. Everything that is, God speaks it into existence. Only Leonard Bernstein, the famous composer, said, the text is mistranslated. It should read, "And God sang, let there be light." Somehow that makes sense to me. The power of God's voice singing. And when God sings, things happen. The power of God's voice in song in the world. And we seem to understand that intuitively. We sing, "This is my Father's world, and to my listening ears all nature sings, and round me rings the music of the spheres." From the very beginning of time, God sang everything into existence, and everything sings back to God. Everything vibrates. Even inanimate objects vibrate, seeking to be on God's wavelength. During the first few years of my life, my family lived in a suburb of Los Angeles where my father worked in the banking industry in one of the downtown high-rises. We attended a large church that had a highly developed music program. And I believe it was in this church that my parents fell in love with the grandeur and majesty of a pipe organ. A few years later, we would move to Washington State, where I would begin my musical training, first in piano and organ, and as well as singing soprano in a boys' choir. My piano teacher at the time was also the organist of our church, and she said that I could begin taking organ lessons when my feet could reach the pedals. Well, around my 8th birthday, my body had elongated enough to where I was bridging the gap between the organ bench and the pedals, and so we were off with organ lessons. Now, I have to confess something. I didn't want to take organ lessons. In fact, I begged my parents to let me quit. But, to their credit, they were relentless. No, they said, quitting is not an option. Studying music is part of your overall educational experience. I remember on the piano in our home was a little framed picture that read, "Someday you'll thank your mother." And there I would sit, practicing scales, my little pieces, with that dumb sign staring me in the face. Yeah, right, I thought. Well, I have thanked my mother and my father many times over, as I am exceedingly blessed to be a church musician and have a career in this field. But those first few years were challenging. What do you expect? Learning anything that is challenging is always difficult in the early going. Any of us who take the time to learn either a difficult language, a sport, an instrument, science, whatever it may be, it's not easy. You don't just do it. You have to practice a lot. However, as time went by and I got a little better each day, I finally came to that point where I could play a piece of music and it didn't sound half bad. It didn't happen overnight, mind you, but I would say it was around the time I turned 13. Now, I still had reservations about learning the organ because I thought, surely I am the only kid on planet Earth who is doing this. How lame. But something began to change as I had the opportunity to learn and grow in my experience with this instrument. It was around this time that the Seattle chapter of the American Guild of Organists hosted their first ever pipe organ encounters program in Seattle. This event was designed to bring together young people who are interested in or learning to play the organ and give them a chance to meet other young people and play and hear some of the finest instruments in the Seattle area. I have to say that attending this event was a turning point for me because finally I saw that there were indeed other kids my age learning to play the organ. In fact, many of them I know have gone on to pretty incredible careers as organists and church musicians. Shortly after, I started taking lessons from a truly outstanding teacher and church musician, Lester Groom. Mr. Groom was a professor at Seattle Pacific University, as well as the music director for the First Presbyterian Church in downtown Seattle. Every other Sunday, I would make the 2.5-hour trip with either my mom or my dad from my hometown in Central Washington to Seattle, where we would attend the Sunday morning service at First Pres, hear the organ and their wonderful choir led by my teacher, and then I would have a lesson following the service. What a wonderful, inspiring experience. It was also during this time, at the age of 15, that I embarked on my first job as an organist for the United Presbyterian Church in Kashmir, Washington. This was a beautiful little stone church complete with stained glass windows, a small pipe organ, and a lovely congregation. I was hooked. I would go on to study with great teachers through the remainder of high school and college years. And later, as I began my career in earnest as a church organist and choir director, I would serve on the executive board and later as dean of the Seattle chapter of the American Guild of Organists. During my tenure, we hosted another pipe organ encounters. Although this time, I was in the role of teacher to young people starting out in their experience with the organ. This was a real honor, having come full circle. Now I was an ambassador for this instrument. In 2002, I had the opportunity to do some organ study in London. It was there that I was fortunate to play many magnificent instruments in some of the most historic buildings in the world. This included the Chapel Royal at the Tower of London, where Queens Anne Boleyn, Catherine Howard, and Sir Thomas More met their untimely end and are buried, not far from the organ. The Brompton Oratory, St. Paul's Cathedral, and the magnificent Westminster Abbey, to name a few. You may be interested to note that George Frederick Handel, the composer whose Messiah is a timeless masterpiece, and whose music we will hear for the postlude, is buried in Westminster Abbey, not far from the organ loft. It was like holy ground. Perhaps the most notable experience I had during this time in London was a Sunday service at Westminster Abbey. This grand edifice with a history dating back to 1065 and having bore witness to the crowning of numerous monarchs, royal weddings and funerals, and various services of state, inspires awe from the moment you walk in the doors. On this particular Sunday, I would take in the majesty of this place, hear the congregation, the mighty pipe organ, and the choir of men and boys singing in full glory the great hymn by Charles Wesley, "Love Divine, All Loves Excelling." Have you ever been so moved by the power of music in such a way that it took your breath away, or made your heart swell with such emotion and gratitude that you just had to stop what you're doing and just take in the moment? I was so moved, I couldn't sing. Tears filled my eyes as I was caught up in this moment and imagined, this must be what heaven is like. It was Charles Wesley, brother of the founder of the Methodist Church, John Wesley, and author of more than 6,000 hymns, whose words would stir my soul in that moment of worship. Charles Wesley, who gave us so many great hymns such as "And Can It Be?", "Christ the Lord is Risen Today," "Angels We Have Heard on High," and "Oh, for 1,000 Tongues to Sing." So inspired is this hymn love divine, all loves excelling, that it is considered one of the greatest hymns ever written. So I conclude with this today. When the challenges of life are dragging you down, when you feel anxious and discouraged, put a song in your heart. Take a moment to sing and remember the great multitudes who raised their voices in song at Solomon's temple and the courts of heaven. May this be your prayer. Finish, then, thy new creation, pure and spotless let us be. Let us see thy great salvation perfectly restored in thee. Change from glory into glory, till in heaven we take our place, till we cast our crowns before thee, lost in wonder, love, and praise. Thanks be to God.